"And how do you know his age?" "By his antlers. You see that this stag has 9 antlers. Now a brocket has but 2 antlers, a staggered 3, and a warrantable stag but 4. At 6 years old the antlers increase in number until they sometimes have 20 or 30. This is a fine beast, and the venison is now getting very good. Now you must see me do the work of my craft." Jacob then cut the throat of the animal, and afterward cut off its head and took out its bowels. "Are you tired, Edward?" said Jacob, as he wiped his hunting knife on the coat of the stag. "No, not the least." "Well, then, we are now, I should think, about 4 or 5 miles from the cottage. Could you find your way home? But that is of no consequence. Smoker will lead you home by the shortest path. I will stay here, and you can saddle White Billy and come back with him, for he must carry the venison back. It's more than we can manage, indeed, as much as we can manage with White Billy to help us. There's more than 20 stone of venison lying here, I can tell you." Edward immediately assented, and Jacob, desiring Smoker to go home, set about flaying and cutting up the animal for its more convenient transportation. In an hour and a half Edward, attended by Smoker, returned with the pony, on whose back the chief portion of the venison was packed. Jacob took a large piece on his own shoulders, and Edward carried another, and Smoker, after regaling himself with a portion of the inside of the animal, came after them. During the walk home Jacob initiated Edward into the terms of venery, and many other points connected with deer stalking, with which we shall not trouble our readers. As soon as they arrived at the cottage the venison was hung up, the pony put in the stable, and then they sat down to dinner with an excellent appetite after their long morning's walk. Alice and Humphrey had cooked the dinner themselves, and it was in the pot, smoking hot, when they returned, and Jacob declared he never ate a better mess in his life. Alice was not a little proud of this, and of the praises she received from Edward and the old forester. The next day Jacob stated his intention of going to Lymington to dispose of a large portion of the venison, and bring back a sack of oatmeal for their cakes. Edward asked to accompany him, but Jacob replied, "Edward, you must not think of showing yourself at Lymington, or anywhere else, for a long time, until you are grown out of memory. It would be folly, and you would risk your sisters' and brothers' lives, perhaps, as well as your own. Never mention it again. The time will come when it will be necessary, perhaps. If so, it cannot be helped. At present you would be known immediately. No, Edward, I tell you what I mean to do. I have a little money left, and I intend to buy you a gun, that you may learn to stalk deer yourself without me. For recollect, if any accident should happen to me, who is there but you to provide for your brother and sisters? At Lymington I am known to many, but out of all who know me there is not one who knows where my cottage is. They know that I live in the New Forest, and that I supply them venison, and purchase other articles in return. That is all that they know, and I may therefore go without fear. I shall sell the venison tomorrow, and bring you back a good gun, and Humphrey shall have the carpenter's tools which he wishes for I think, by what he does with his knife, that he has a turn that way, and it may be useful. I must also get some other tools for Humphrey and you, as we shall then be able to work all together, and some threads and needles for Alice, for she can sew a little, and practice will make her more perfect." Jacob went off to Lymington as he had proposed, and returned late at night with White Billy well loaded. He had a sack of oatmeal, some spades and hoes, a saw and chisels, and other tools, 2 scythes, and 2 3-pronged forks, and when Edward came to meet him, he put into his hand a gun with a very long barrel. "I believe, Edward, that you will find that a good one, for I know where it came from. It belonged to one of the rangers who was reckoned the best shot in the forest. I know the gun, for I have seen it on his arm, and have taken it in my hand to examine it more than once. He was killed at Naseby with your father, poor fellow, and his widow sold the gun to meet her wants." "Well," replied Edward, "I thank you much, Jacob, and I will try if I cannot kill as much venison as will pay you back the purchase money. I will, I assure you." "I shall be glad if you do, Edward, not because I want the money back, but because then I shall be more easy in my mind about you all, if anything happens to me. As soon as you are perfect in your woodcraft, I shall take Humphrey in hand, for there is nothing like having 2 strings to your bow. Tomorrow we will not go out. We have meat enough for 3 weeks or more, and now the frost has set in. It will keep well. You shall practice at a mark with your gun, that you may be accustomed to it, for all guns, even the best, require a little humouring." Edward, who had often fired a gun before, proved the next morning that he had a very good eye, and after 2 or 3 hours' practice hit the mark at 100 yards almost every time. "I wish you would let me go out by myself," said Edward, overjoyed at his success. "You would bring home nothing, boy," replied Jacob. "No, no, you have a great deal to learn yet. But I tell you what you shall do. Any time that we are not in great want of venison, you shall have the first fire." "Well, that will do," replied Edward. The winter now set in with great severity, and they remained almost altogether within doors. Jacob and the boys went out to get firewood and dragged it home through the snow. "I wish, Jacob," said Humphrey, "that I was able to build a cart, for it would be very useful, and White Billy would then have something to do. But I can't make the wheels, and there is no harness." "That's not a bad idea of yours, Humphrey," replied Jacob. "We will think about it. If you can't build a cart, perhaps I can buy one. It would be useful if it were only to take the dung out of the yard on the potato ground, for I have hitherto carried it out in baskets, and it's hard work." "Yes, and we might saw the wood into billets, and carry it home in the cart, instead of dragging it in this way. My shoulder is quite sore with the rope, it cuts me so." "Well, when the weather breaks up, I will see what I can do, Humphrey. But just now the roads are so blocked up that I do not think we could get a cart from Lymington to the cottage, although we can a horse, perhaps." But if they remained indoors during the inclement weather, they were not idle. Jacob took this opportunity to instruct the children in everything. Alice learned how to wash and how to cook. It is true that sometimes she scalded herself a little, sometimes burned her fingers, and other accidents did occur, from the articles employed being too heavy for them to lift by themselves. But practice and dexterity compensated for want of strength, and fewer accidents happened every day. Humphrey had his carpenter's tools, and although at first he had many failures, he wasted nails and wood, by degrees he learned to use his tools with more dexterity, and made several little useful articles. Little Edith could now do something, for she made and baked all the oatmeal cakes, which saved Alice a good deal of time and trouble in watching them. It was astonishing how much the children could do, now that there was no one to do it for them, and they had daily instruction from Jacob. In the evening Alice sat down with her needle and thread to mend the clothes. At first they were not very well done, but she improved every day. Edith and Humphrey learned to read while Alice worked, and then Alice learned, and thus passed the winter away so rapidly that although they had been 5 months at the cottage, it did not appear as if they had been there as many weeks. All were happy and contented, with the exception perhaps of Edward, who had fits of gloominess, and occasionally showed signs of impatience as to what was passing in the world, of which he remained in ignorance. That Edward Beverley had fits of gloominess and impatience is not surprising. Edward had been brought up as the heir of Arnwood, and a boy at a very early age imbibes notions of his position, if it promises to be a high one. He was not 2 miles from that property which by right was his own. His own mansion had been reduced to ashes, he himself was hidden in the forest, and he could but not feel his position. He sighed for the time when the king's cause could be again triumphant, and his arrival at that age when he could in person support and uphold the cause. He longed to be in command, as his father had been, to lead his men on to victory, to recover his property, and to revenge himself on those who had acted so cruelly toward him. This was human nature, and much as Jacob Armitage would expostulate with him, and try to divert his feelings into other channels, long as he would preach to him about forgiveness of injuries, and patience until better times should come, Edward could not help brooding over these thoughts, and if ever there was a breast animated with intense hatred against the Puritans, it was that of Edward Beverley. Although this was to be lamented, it could not create surprise or wonder in the old forester. All he could do was, as much as possible, to reason with him, to soothe his irritated feelings, and by constant employment try to make him forget for a time the feelings of ill will which he had conceived. One thing was, however, sufficiently plain to Edward, which was, that whatever might be his wrongs, he had not the power at present to redress them, and this feeling, perhaps more than any other, held him in some sort of check, and as the time when he might have an opportunity appeared far distant, even to his own sanguine imagination, so by degrees did he contrive to dismiss from his thoughts what it was no use to think about at present. End of chapter 4.